further education to our students here and to try to develop sort of a consciousness on within our students in regards to environmental policy and environmental issues that are happening not only nationwide but also locally. And so out of this desire to try and bring this to our students, Neville's developed a series of classes. I've developed a class, and our goal is to try and provide a complete picture to our students to understand what's going on. For those of you that are in my Poli-Sci 206 class, the book and a lot of what you're going to see in the book and what we talk about are really at the national level, right? But what happens at the decisions made at the national level will affect us at the local level. And so it's important for us to have that complete picture. Because often what happens, as Neville says, is folks, when we live in these communities, we often tend to only focus on what's happening here and not looking at the bigger picture. And so that's our goal, is to try to provide this overall view of the environment, environmental policy, how people are, how the environment is treated, and from there sort of get your thoughts and thinkings and get you involved in it. Because we truly believe that it's a process where everyone needs to be a part of so that we can affect change. And change is really what we are looking for. Change, positive change. We have positive change for you as an individual and growth through education, and then positive change in the community because of the decisions that you make. It was interesting because one of the early assignments we used to have was I used to make students do a trash inventory. Mm-hmm. I used to have them actually track everything they throw away in 1 week. And they were surprised at how much trash they produced. Just absolutely surprised how much they would throw away. You know, and if you truly want to start saying, you know what, I don't know anything about sustainable, I don't know how to do this stuff, and you want to say, you know what, I'm willing to take a step, do a waste inventory. Do an inventory of every single thing you throw away. Keep it in a little piece of paper, or maybe put it in your iPhone or something like that, and you'll track just how much waste you produce. If you do that for yourself, not for a grade, just for your own personal growth, then you'll start realizing sort of what you can do to reduce waste. You start realizing what could be replaced, what cannot be replaced. Sometimes waste is necessary, depending. If you're a diabetic, waste is necessary. You know, you have certain things you just can't avoid. But take a look and see. It'd be a great challenge, you know, for students to kind of take on. And it's simple to do. Every time something goes in, whether it's a Q-tip, a toothpick, a pen, anything that's tossed in the trash, write it down for a week and see what you come up with. Hopefully your list is like this. I fear some of us, our list might be what?
Yeah.
Might be very long, right? Might be very, very long.
So what are the options then? Like basically the things that you would throw away during the recycle?
Anything you toss.
No, I mean, like, what would be the benefit of doing that? Like, to try and recycle then and further and these things are less disposable?
For us to live a sustainable life, Mike, sometimes we have to know what we're doing. And what is the first thing we often lack? Knowledge. How do we produce knowledge? We literally have to do it. This is what we tell people if they have fiscal problems at home. The first thing we tell them to do is track your expenses. Why? Got to know where your money's going. How can you decide what's important in life financially if you don't even know when your money is going, right? How are we going to track? How are you going to know what's important in your life sustainably if you're not tracking where your trash is going? The next thing we do is often tell your students, after you're done tracking your trash, what can be replaced? What can be reduced? What can be reused? You'd be surprised, it's much more than you think. There's a lot there that can be done. And you don't actually have to really change your lifestyle much. And you make really good decisions and you impact. And we are doing this as a country. You know, Los Angeles back in 1990 decided to build a train to go to a dump out in Lancaster. It's called the Train to the Dump. And because they thought that our landfills were going to fill to the point where they were going to be overflowing by 2010. What they realized is over the past 20 years, we've been reducing so much waste and reusing so much that they no longer need that train. Unfortunately, they already spent $100 million to build that darn train so they can go out there to a dump that LA County's never going to use in Lancaster. But it's there, and it's because we're not using as much waste. Knowledge is then consciousness. So if we have more knowledge and we're more conscious of what we're doing.
We won't make as many mistakes that way.
That's
For
the
our
hope.
future.
We're still human, right?
Yeah.
We're imperfect.
Well, of
But our
course,
hope
yeah.
is to minimize our mistakes and our impact. But, you know, look, we make decisions, even though we know we're impacting the environment or impacting others, we live with those decisions because we make other decisions. You see what we're saying? I live 2 hours away. How much pollution do you think I'm adding by driving up here 2 hours.
2 hours worth.
2 hours worth. That's a lot, isn't it? My carbon footprint is huge. So why don't I move up here? Would that solve the problem?
It all
Sure.
depends.
Yeah. My son, because of his disorder, needs to be next to Rady's children for his surgeries. I need to be in network. So that's concept, right? These things, these
Right.
balances and trade-offs we have in life.
Priorities, yeah.
You can judge me and say, Professor, you have a huge carbon footprint. But on the other side, I also have to take care of my child. And so you have to have that balance. And that's what sustainable development is about. Hardcore environmentalists would not make that choice. The hardcore environmentalists would say, well, then your son has to suffer for the betterment of the environment. And that's why they got such a bad rap in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
They had really good intentions, but the reason why they got a bad rap was because they were willing to put, and then somebody like me would say, well then, to hell with environmentalism. Why would I care then if you're going to put your needs of the environment above my son's? And the concept of sustainable development is, well, why can't we have both? So what would be a good solution to my problem, you think?
To get a car that doesn't put out so many.
Correct. What would be a good thing to do? Get a
Oh,
hybrid.
electric?
Yeah.
Yeah, get a hybrid or electric. Will that help my problem?
Yeah.
Yes, that's sustainable development. And guess what I'm trying to do this month, actually?
Get a hybrid.
Or I'm hoping maybe a TDI, which gets like 45 miles to the gallon.
Yeah.
And the diesel, and actually I want to get that little converter so you can use biodiesel. Yeah, so, which is like a $500 converter. So but I'm conscious of what? Of my imprint. And then I'm conscious of my imprint at the appropriate time I can do what? The right decision. But this is what we're
Also
talking
has to be a good. Also, another thing, just to add to your question, Mike, is I heard you kind of say, what are your alternatives to just throwing away, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to find out, just to kind of build to some of the other workshops and how fun this is going to get. And I think it's going to be a really fun class because we're getting some really awesome feedback already. But for example, one of the things we can do is take our food waste and all our vegetable waste, which is 50%, probably more of our food is just flat out wasted. That's from our table, right? Before it gets to us, it's way higher than that because they're so picky in what they send forward. But we can compost, which is what nature does, right? It takes that carbon and that nutrients, the nitrogen and the phosphorus, and it decomposes it and puts it back into our soils. Well, we've got so lazy as a culture is none of us do that. None of us, yeah, right. Sorry, I'm freaking, sorry.
I do.
I meant none of us in the general public, not you guys. So we don't do that even in farming. We want to use chemical fertilizers manufactured out. So we do that because it's easier and we're lazy and we don't want to take the time to even just take it out and bury it in our garden, simple composting. But we're going to hear, not next week, but the week after, we're going to have a guy here, John Davis, super innovative guy, works on all kinds of state level projects that runs the recycling and composting network up here for San Bernardino County. And he's going to come in and talk to us about some of these things you don't even think about. So let's say this area does not have green bins for organic waste, right? We don't do that as a community.
We don't?
No, we don't.
We have that in San Marcos.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, but let me tell you what you guys do. You guys are even worse. I'm getting to this right now. So we don't even do it. But in LA County, what they do is they do have those bins, but they don't have the composting facility. So you know what they do is they take all that waste, including Dino's waste, his lawn clippings and his tree branches and his lettuce that his son didn't want to eat that night, and they spread it over the top of the solid waste, of the papers and the bags and the cardboard of that solid waste. They spread it as a barrier to kind of hold it down. Now we start thinking, man, oh man, we're not getting the fertilizer. Now what's some of the other problems? Well, when that stuff decomposes without oxygen anaerobically inside, it produces methane. And so now we're like, okay, well, what does methane do? Well, first of all, methane is a fuel. It's propane, right? So we could be using it to power all kinds of things instead of letting it go to the atmosphere. When methane gets in the atmosphere, it's 30 to 50 times worse, molecule per molecule, than CO2 at trapping heat. So it's a 30 to 50 times worse greenhouse gas than what, and it's totally avoidable. Lots of times with CO2, it's not avoidable. Like with the mine, we need concrete. I don't consider that very avoidable until we start building everything out of, I don't know what.
Straw bales.
Yeah, straw bale. But, so you see there's always these other pieces of the pie. So certain sustainable practices like having a community composting or training the people the way this group does it. John Davis, they have a master they train local people to compost, have huge benefits in many different areas. So you start seeing some of these interconnections of what we call, and the reason I bring it up is they're called sustainable practices. And some of them, your bang for your buck is just unbelievable.
And it doesn't take much.
Yeah.
If you have old composting, like me, like I've tried composting,
Yeah.
probably like everybody else, it's still sitting there.
Yeah.
It hasn't
Dried
been
out.
here. It's a big butt bin. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell to do with it. Is it no good? Is it like filled with methane? Is it no good after that? It's still composting?
No, it kind of loses, it just volatilizes some of the nutrients that go off in the air, but no, all you do now is you put water to it, get it moist, not soaked wet, but just to where you can feel it's moist. Turn it once a week, and in 3 weeks' time, it'll be compost. Add some greens to it because it's mostly browns now. You want 50% green looking stuff, and 50% browns are ideal. So you've got the browns, just start adding some lettuce or lawn clippings, and just keep it moist in the desert and aerate it so that it becomes aerobic and doesn't produce methane, and you're home up and away.
You can't use meat for a compost unit.
You know, not a good idea. It actually can be used, but it attracts flies.
Yeah.
It could cause smelling, things like that. Yeah. Have a dog. Feed the meat to the dog. Yeah. So sorry, I didn't want to go off on a tangent there. But real quick, while you're doing this, one more quick thing is field trips, because you started talking about it. Let's get this done so we're all on the same page. Just hang on to it for a moment. Is to go on a field trip, and we talked about this before everyone else came in from political science. You're all invited. They're the cherry on the top. The two big field trips that we're talking about will have buses. So it's really cool, luxury bus. You go along, and it's pretty fun. And we visit all these really cool places up here. We have more sustainable practices going around here that you can shake a stick at. Lots of cool stuff. We'll visit PG&E and the Aaron Brockovich Chromium 6 thing. They give us a full-on good tour there and show us what's really going on, all these kinds of things. So, but you've got to do liability releases, okay? I was telling them how the vice president chose to, and he actually picked the VP here. Hey.
Camera.
But AVP chose to focus in on field trips, and these ones particularly, it's only a week away, and they're like 2 weeks. So I'm going to hand out the forms. I've got 3 of them. Who did not get the forms yet? Okay, let's start in the front here. Okay. Your ones are separate forms. They're on 2 Thursdays. They're next Thursday, June 26th, and then they are on July 10th. One goes up into Big Bear and out into the Mojave, kind of upper part of the Mojave watershed. The other one goes south down to Barstow. The rest of you, I'm going to hand these out to you. You got to be really smart because I copied them by mistake on both sides of the paper. So on one piece of paper, fill out June 26th, and on another piece of paper, July 10th. You got it? I'm going to give you 2. Don't fill out the same field trip on both, because that's not going to help me. I'm just going to get turned back. Kyle knows what this goes like. It's a big pain in the neck. Okay,
And
so
they
2
won't
there.
give us a hard time about it.
So fill out 2 separate ones, even though on the same page.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to fill them out twice. And also, so I've filled out the times and all that. Make sure your personal details are complete. And also make sure that you have a medical insurance carrier mark. It could be NA for non-applicable because you don't have one, but please mark that, and not in pencil. They'll send them back to me if they're in pencil. The next thing is you need to have a, Kyle, remember, you need to have a contact person. Okay, so you can use each other this time. Okay, so you have to have a contact person, and you have to sign it and date it. Okay, and have phone numbers. Please fill it out completely. If it's not filled out completely, I had to promise to the dean today that you will not go on the field trip, and that would be extremely sad. So you arrive here at 7:30 in the morning, and I would have got a notice from up there, and you're not going. Okay?
They need them.
You
Another form for her.
yeah. So that's 2 forms because you're going on both, right? And obviously the political science students are super welcome. We'd love to have you. You have great input, and you don't have to be signing. That's got both of them? Good. Here we go. Got 2 forms. Yeah, so you can, if you're done with them, start handing them to me. I'll start checking them. Just put them on, hand them down the end of the thing, and I'll pick them up as we go. So, everybody got that? Cool, thank you.
All right. So what I want to do today is kind of talk a little bit about the book that we use, The Environmental Policy Paradox by Zachary Smith. It does a really good job of sort of introducing some basic concepts, which then allows us to sort of understand environmental policy. So what I'm going to do today is go kind of through chapter 1 and 2. I don't do a PowerPoint where I have a bunch of words. I kind of do pictures, so it works a little bit nicer, kind of gives some images. And then in a couple of weeks from now, do a little bit more on chapter 3 and chapter 4, talking about how policy is devised, the policy process itself. The stuff that nobody really likes to talk about, you know, it's difficult and complex, but at least what it does is it gives us an insight into how policy, how the environment, the impact on the environment is mostly through government policy, so it's important to understand how this policy is formulated. One of the things Smith does, though, is he kind of tries to open the book with an understanding of the subfield of ecology. And ecology is a subfield of biology that strives to kind of explain the interrelationships among people, other living things, and the environment. So ecology is a subfield within biology that strives to explain the relationships among people, other living things, and an environment. That people don't live by themselves. Other living things are not just there out in the forest. And it's not that the environment is separate. All 3 elements are interrelated to each other. So let's define some of these things, because this interrelationships is also referred to as an ecosystem. And an ecosystem, for those of you that have taken Neville's classes, are used to these definitions. For those of you that are new, an ecosystem is any group of plants, animals, or non-living things that interact within their environment. Ecosystems is any group of plants, animals, or non-living things that interact within their environment. So ecologists essentially study ecosystems. They study the individual organisms. They study population of organisms, community organisms, and the ecosystem that hosts all of these different organisms. So this is what ecologists do. Why start with the ecologists? Because they're the ones who provide most of the information, knowledge, both scientific and otherwise, that allows us then to understand policy. Because policy is often made based on scientific fact or some kind of interpretation of scientific fact. And so it's important to understand who is actually producing this information. Now, ecosystems sometimes tend to appear as independent units that have little interaction with each other. However, ecosystems are kind of open. Really what they do is they interact with other ecosystems and overall to produce a larger environment. This larger environment is often referred to as the ecosphere or a biosphere. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. This is the ecosystem of the salmon. The salmon itself goes through a series of life cycle that allows us to understand sort of how this ecosystem takes place. From its incubation to its emergence, to its rearing in the freshwater, to its rearing in the estuary, to its migration to the Pacific Ocean, and its migration back to spawn, you notice that there's an interaction between freshwater and ocean water here. That one fish actually travels several different ecosystems. this fish is part of our biosphere. This fish is part of our ecosphere that we speak of. Now, other than receiving energy from the sun, the resources the planet started with are those that exist today. This is why some people have also kind of referred to it as a spaceship Earth. Like a spaceship, the planet must work with what it has. Until science tells us otherwise, we only have what we know. That may change. We don't know. As we dig deeper down into the Earth, an article just came out, last week, saying there's the potential for having the largest ocean ever beneath the mantle crust. But that is a hypothesis that they're saying is probably been supported by the presence of certain types of elements that they have found. But they're not quite sure. So until science says otherwise, we have to live with what Earth has given us until we find something else, or until we find it outside of Earth. And our technology isn't there yet for that to happen. So when certain resources then are exhausted or converted into a form which are no longer useful for humans, then new supplies simply cannot be imported. So how then does an ecosystem function? We want to understand this function and in the limits to humankind's ability to try and manipulate the environment. And so in order to understand our manipulation of the environment, we should look at 4 laws of ecology that Barry Commoner have come up with. And the first law of ecology is that everything is connected to everything. And what do we mean by that? What do you guys think that means? Everything is connected to everything.
It's a chain.
A chain. What do you mean by a chain?
Well, if you take something out, it's going to fall apart.
It's like a house of cards. What happens if you take out one of those cards in a house of cards? It's going to get really unstable. What happens if you take another one out? It's going to fall, right? So everything is connected to everything else. That is the first law of ecology. So what happens when you introduce a foreign element into that ecosystem? Changes occur. And when those changes occur, sometimes the ecosystem can readjust and gain balance, and other times that ecosystem can simply never recover. So take a look here at this slide on mercury in fish. The mercury is produced by mine production, coal-fired plants, also comes from volcano eruptions. Methylmercury goes into the system, and what happens? The krill eat the mercury, then who eats the krill? The salmon, the pollock, the oysters. Who eats the smaller fish? Larger trout, larger tuna, right? Bluefin tuna. This is then canned, right? Who eats the canned tuna? We do. Then the shark, the pike, and the albacore, and the halibut, they eat the smaller fish. Who eats albacore and halibut? Every time I go to a sushi place. Yeah, you laugh, right? But what do you eat at sushi? You don't eat sushi? Well, I do. Right? Absolutely. Yeah, I love sushi. But what's happening here? Why? They're telling us you should only eat it a few times per month. You should only eat this a few times per week.
Because you'll live longer like the Orientals.
Well, we call them Asians, right? People from Asia prefer to be called Asians, right? But that's okay. Orientals are now used for rugs.
Not all Asians live longer though, only the Western Orient.
Not all. Some of them don't live long, like those in Myanmar. They don't live very long because they don't have really good fish. No, they just don't have access to medicine, access to things. No, really depends.
One third world countries live to 114.
Yeah, what's that?
There are people in third world countries live to 114 now.
A few of them. Generally speaking, the longest living people on Earth are the Japanese.
No,
Then
it's in,
Singapore.
Japan. Japan has the longest lifespan right now.
I'm trying to think of the specific one.
But not all Asians have long lifespans. Most of the time, yeah. Diet matters. The next longest place I think is either Italy or Greece. It's the Mediterranean diet. 'Cause
Yeah.
they eat a lot of olive oil and seafood and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, but you got to be careful eating fish here in the United States. Why? There's a fear. Yeah. In fact, the Environmental Protection Agency has given advice for how much you should consume.
That's the name of that group of people are from Okinawa. They live
Okinawans?
a long time. Yeah.
Sure.
They're over hundreds of years old.
But we got to be careful, and this is a good segue. We need to be careful that we don't have what's called a overriding factor. Often what happens is when something occurs, a phenomenon, it's usually a confluence of events. And that makes it difficult to study, doesn't it? Why is it difficult to study?
There and their people are just plain happy.
But there's a lot of things that happen, isn't it? Yeah, it's hard to measure. Why is it hard to measure?
There's so many different factors, especially when it's so large.
So many different variables, right? So many different variables that go into why Okinawans live so long. So many different variables. Part of it's diet, like you mentioned, Travis. You know, part of it is that they're happier. Their environment, they're just happier. Part of it is they don't work certain jobs, right? Part of it is, at least in Okinawa, that their economy is mostly supported by the Marine Corps.
Yes.
And so they actually have a different economic model than they do in other places. So they mostly are service industry, so the stress level is low. They don't have, they have really secure jobs. So there's a lot of variables that are really difficult to measure. How do you measure happiness? How do you measure, and there are people who do this, by the way. There's a professor at UCR who spends all her time doing scientific models of happiness. But it's difficult. So it's good though, because one of the things we need to be careful of in environmental policy making is a lot of times you say, well, this thing is causing that, therefore we need to ban this. And sometimes that actually isn't the case. It's something else. So we get careful with these single factor explanations. That yes, we have to say in scientific terms that this factor accounts for most of the variance. When we can say that, then yes, we can say this is a single factor explanation. But that's really difficult. There's very few times like that where one factor explains everything. Unfortunately, wouldn't it be nice if it was one factor that could explain everything? Then we could simply what? Zero in on that one thing, right? But that's not reality, unfortunately. For most things. There are a few things we can zero in on. But for most of the times, that's not the case. And that actually is what makes environmental policy so difficult. Because we wish we could just focus on one thing, right? But instead, there's so many things that come into play, and it makes it so much harder. And it's okay, though. But this is reality. This is what we are paid to do. So, oops. Pull my notes here. The second law of ecology is that everything must go somewhere. The second law of ecology is that everything must go somewhere. So if something is produced, it's got to end up somewhere. Where it ends up depends on the society. But everything ends up somewhere. And it really is applicable when thinking of the Earth as an enclosed unit. Nothing is really thrown away. Nothing is really thrown away. The mercury that goes up in the air is recycled into the ocean, which then goes through the ecosystem that exists. Nothing really is thrown away. Everything goes somewhere. That's the second law of ecology. Third law of ecology is that nature knows best. Throughout most of human history, at least in Western cultures, there's been an assumption that humans can or should maybe perhaps conquer nature. That's not only a religious thing, also a humanistic thing as well. Religion often gave us this idea that we have dominion over the earth, as Neville pointed out to an earlier verse in the Old Testament. But those who are also non-religious or humanists, or prefer to actually talk about rationality and reason, they often argue too that the resources that are there are for us to use to better ourselves. And so Mother Nature, though, knows best. And Mother Nature knows best how to handle things. Humankind is really, at best, a poor judge on how their manipulations of the environment will impact nature. Ecosystems have developed through natural selection over billions of years. And then we start introducing things quickly. And ecosystems can't handle it. And then we try to fix it by not mimicking nature. Instead, we try to fix things through our own technological advancements. And it doesn't always work. Mother Nature always knows best what to do. The fourth law of ecology and final law of ecology is there's no such thing as a free lunch. Any interaction with nature, any extraction, use, or disruption carries with it some cost. Anything extracted by nature by human effort must be replaced. Payment of this price cannot be avoided. It can only be delayed. There is no free lunch. If we do X, it causes Y. There is causality in nature. Causality means that something happens. It's consequential. Sometimes we actually have no idea what it is. When we don't know what it is, it's called unintended consequences. It's sort of like you went on a date with that guy, and you didn't know what it was going to lead to, but it led to an unintended consequence. And the next thing you know, you're regretting it. There's unintended consequences in everything. Now, does that mean that we should live without risk? Of course not, right? We're going to have to assume some risk in things that we do. The goal is to try to minimize that risk through knowledge and to try to manage that risk. In fact, risk management is a huge part. Insurance is all about risk management. Whether you have auto insurance, health insurance, life insurance, I don't know, you name it. Any kind of insurance you have is all about managing risks to the asset that you have, whether it be your health, your car, your sea-doo at home, your house, fire insurance for a house, earthquake insurance. It's all managing that risk. And then they charge you based on that risk. So if you exhibit riskier behavior, do they charge you more?
Yep.
The answer is yes. So what happens if you are a riskier driver?
Higher
By
rate.
virtue of what's that?
Higher rates?
So is it safe to say, using that analogy, that certain human practices are riskier
Yes.
than others, and that they have a higher impact to the environment? Sure they do. Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. So another component of our relationship with nature is the notion of steady states. Steady states. Steady states refer to the level of activity within an ecosystem that can be maintained over a long period of time. So when we have a steady state, we're saying, what can this ecosystem maintain? And when have we reached a point that it's no longer steady, that we've upset this ecosystem? And that's important for us to understand the steady state for different ecosystems. Now, given the limitations on arable land and water resources, there is an upper limit of human population that the world can sustain. There's only so much land that we can produce, and there's so much water out there that we can produce. So there is a limit. Now, when I get later into the book, we talk about how technology can sometimes push that limit further. But we have to conceptually realize that there's still a limit, even if we haven't reached it yet. And we hope technology can do what? Push it. But we're careful not to count on that. What happens if we count on technology to push to create more water, and push to create more power, and push to create more land for us?
Destroy the environment.
What happens if we're wrong?
We're gonna have major consequences.
We're going to have major consequences. So we run a risk when we rely on technology. So are we saying to avoid technology to solve our problems? No. What are we saying? Be careful, because what happens if we think, oh, well, technology will solve all our problems? But what happens if it doesn't? Mike?
Well, yeah, just like with seeding plants, I mean, you try to like produce rainfall, and like that's obviously apparent. We want to look out with this, a very bad idea. You ever try seeding plants?
Yeah, there's unintended consequences to that. You know, and the unintended, I mean, China used it to try and clean up its atmosphere for the 2008 Summer Olympics. You know, and so China, the life expectancy, unfortunately, is dropping. Why is that? Yeah, there's so much pollution in the major cities in China right now. Yeah, that people are leaving. In fact, there's so many wealthy Chinese. The first thing they're doing is buying a place out here
Yeah.
in LA. Do you blame them? I would too. Beijing is a disaster. In Beijing, literally, they put a meter on top, and it was 500 parts per million. I think was the highest reading ever, and it was put on top of the U.S. Embassy. A little reading on how heavy the pollution was. I mean, it's just disgusting.
I was in Beijing in '96, and it wasn't as bad as LA was in '84.
Absolutely. When did it start getting bad?
I don't know.
Yeah, about mid-2000s. Absolutely. It wasn't that bad at all in the 90s, was it? No, and then everybody rode their bicycles, not a lot of pollution. Then as people started getting money, what did they say? I don't want to ride a bicycle, what do I rather do?
Yeah, you want to live like everybody else.
Exactly. Want to live like everybody else, so they all started driving cars. What happens when 15 million people all start to decide driving cars?
Yeah, they got all the vehicles over there too, because they're
Yeah.
these high rises.
Yeah, what happens when everyone says I want to drive a car, and 15 million people were riding bicycles, and now 15 million people are driving cars? What do you think happens? What's that? It's a massive traffic jam. It is. Yeah, Beijing is one big traffic jam now. That's right. Now everyone who comes talks about the pollution. Shanghai is even worse.
Yeah, they do.
It's even worse. Now, where are we? All right. Ecosystems are dynamic. They can also have multiple steady states. When an ecosystem collapses, it often has the inability to regenerate, and that's usually magnified by human actions. Closely then related to the concept of a steady state is what Neville's been talking about, that of sustainability. Sustainability then is the idea that we should use resource either by non-renewable extraction or degradation must be limited. So if we're going to use non-renewable resources that are extracted or by degradation, pollution, we need to limit them to a point where it does not threaten the regenerative capacity of natural ecosystems. So we don't want to take so much out of a natural ecosystem that it prohibits this ecosystem from regenerating itself. So sustainability says you can take it, can't you? Go back to Neville's example about the turtles. Can we take turtle eggs and sell them on the open market? Yes, we just can't take so many that it does what? That it kills the turtle population. You see the logic in that? So sustainability development folks are not saying don't use resources. What are they saying? Just use the right amount that you don't upset the apple cart. Yeah, that's right, moderation. Just take a few apples, don't take the entire cart. Because what happens if you take the wrong apple from the bottom?
They all fall off.
They all fall off. I don't even think they have apple carts anymore. Yeah. They should, right?
Yeah.
Now, Garrett Hardin wrote something called The Tragedy of the Commons. There's this notion you need to understand in an environment called the commons. The commons is a resource available to many users. That's what we mean by commons. So it's interesting, if you transfer to Cal State San Bernardino, they have a commons area. That commons area is a resource that's available to any user. That means any student can go there and use the commons. This is an old English term that they used to describe basically like your big living room that everyone can go to and use. So let's say you live in a house and each one of your kids has their own room, right? And then you guys all come into the living room, and the living room everybody shares. That's your shared space, right? That's your commons. So normally at a university, if you're at Cal State San Bernardino, probably not a good idea, but let's say University of San Diego State, where everybody lives on campus, then they have a commons area where you can eat, you can hang out, watch TV. If you go to Cal State San Marcos, they have apartment-style living where there's a commons room on every floor where all the students can hang out. So a commons is a resource that is available to all users. In the environment, those type of resources are stuff like groundwater, the air, or the ocean. Would you consider the beach a commons? Yes, why?
It's for everybody.
It's for everybody. Is it only limited to a few wealthy people on the coast? No, can anybody use the beach? Can you drive from the high desert and use the beach?
Yep.
Absolutely. Most of it, actually. Most of it. I mean, there's most of it unless it's cordoned off for other reasons. Right? But you can pretty much go anywhere you want on the beach, right? Okay, that would be a commons. Yeah?
Beach closes at like 11. You can't really reach 11. Is it technically a commons?
Great question. What do you think? It's still a commons. Why? It's close to who?
Use.
It's close to?
Everyone.
That's right. Is it only open to a select few group of people?
No.
So everyone's what? Off the beach, yeah. So it's still a commons. Everybody uses it. You see what I'm saying? If they were to limit it, in some places in the world, like Florida, you can own that part of the beach. And no one else have access to it. Is that a commons then?
No.
No, it is not. Is there a commons area up here on campus?
Yeah, the cafeteria.
Student Activity Center. Is that a commons that everybody can go to? Yeah. Anybody can go there and hang out and do it. And trust me, do people hang out there all the time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's their second home, right? Especially at fall at the beginning. Right? No one, if people come out, they have nowhere to go, so they're just hanging out at the Student Activity Center all day long. That's okay. That's what it's meant for. It's a commons open for BBC students. A tragedy then occurs when a rational individual will maximize his or her returns at the expense of others and ultimately the common himself. What happens in the tragedy is that somebody says, well, I don't have to take care of the commons because I know someone else will. So in other words, I'm going to go to the beach, I'm going to leave my trash all over the place. I know I'm not going to pick it up. Why?
Somebody else will.
Somebody else will. So therefore I don't need to worry about it. This is a tragedy of the commons. When you use up all the water, or use up all the clean air, or use up all the good parts of the beach, and you don't worry about it because you think someone else will. Or you simply don't even care. You're maximizing your utility, which in economic terms is a fancy way of saying, I'm going to make myself happy and I don't really care if it causes anybody else pain. That's called maximizing your utility. It's an economic phrase that you'll hear. Maximizing your utility. Very fancy way of saying I'm going to make myself happy at someone else's expense. Yes?
So the tragedy of the commons would also be like fishermen.
Absolutely.
There's one fisherman that will go out and overfish that.
Yes.
area.
They will overfish everything and not leave fish for anyone else. Then what happens to the fishing population? It declines to the point where then it cannot regenerate itself and the ecosystem is unsustainable. And then what happened is this fisherman overfished to the point where he took it all from everybody. Why did he fish like this? Why did he fish so much?
He was thinking only about himself. Greedy.
Making as much money as he could, right? Maximizing your utility, just so you know, is the basic tenet of capitalism. Making yourself happy is the basic tenet of capitalism. Otherwise, why would you buy stuff? That's the basic tenet of capitalism. Capitalism has an inherent problem with environmentalism. This is why environmentalists are so rejecting of capitalism. And this is why business people tend to hate environmentalists. Environmentalists tend to hate business people. Because ultimately, capitalism is about maximizing your utility, making yourself happy.
Maximizing the amount of money off the people that's around. You got 14
That's still, Travis, that's still utility. That's under the concept of utility. Does that make sense? Whether it be profit or what else could make you happy? Is it just profit or money? What else could make you happy?
Helping others.
What's that?
Helping others to make you happy.
What else could make you happy?
Nature. Nature makes you happy.
Rare flower.
Okay.
Well, one guy's making 491% of all the money and doing none of the work, and the rest of the population is doing nothing. There's like 14 capitalists out there, and we're all being capitalized on.
That's right. I would say he's maximizing his utility.
And on our expense.
That's capitalism.
Yeah, it's right.
No, capitalism is not about right or wrong. Capitalism is about what? Maximizing your utility.
For a few, just like a few.
If you happen to be the few who can. What happens if you're not? Yeah, then sorry. Yeah, that's right. That's the problem that hardcore business folk have, is they see a zero-sum approach. So environmentalists also see it zero-sum. Let me explain what zero-sum means. It's another upper term. What I mean by that is that a term that a bunch of boring people use. You know, zero-sum means that if I taketh away from the, if I giveth to the business people gain. Automatically, that must be a loss for the who? Environmental people. So every time the environmental people saw that the economy was growing and people were getting richer, they said it had to come at the expense of the what? The environment. That's what we call by zero sum. So zero sum means that you gain, I lose. I don't have a. I can show you quickly how this looks. Oops.
Do you want to go on the board or?
There's a board?
Yeah, right behind.
No, that's good. We're good.
Okay.
Let me show you what I mean. Very simple. I'll put it in just simple math for you to see it. Let me make this. Okay. Here's my equation. Oops. If in a zero-sum game, forgive me. If I plus 1 here, what must I do down here in order for the equation to stay
Minus one.
-1? This is a zero-sum game. In order for the equation to stay at 0, if I gain 1 on one side of the equation, what must I do in order for the equation to stay balanced at 0? Take away. Do you guys see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
This is basic math, right? So, environmentalists and economists often have a zero-sum approach to the way they see things. Environmentalists often say, well, if the economy's thriving, it has to be at the expense of the environment. And economists say, well, if the economy is, if we're helping the environment, it has to be at the cost of the economy. So the two of them go back and forth. Sustainable development tries to get rid of this. Sustainable development says it's not a zero-sum game. Instead, what we can have, they argue, is a positive sum game. That instead what we have here is the equation is still balanced, but what did we just see? both the economy gained and the environment gained. This is sustainable development. It's not a zero sum. If we don't +1 for the economy, that means it has to be a -1 for the environment. Or if we +1 for the environment, it has to be a -1 for the economy. Instead, why can't we +1 for the economy? The economy can grow. And why can't we also +1 for the environment?
You can, if the environmental work employs people.
It's yes, yes, essentially. But do we need a lot of knowledge for this? Do we need to know how to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it easy?
No.
No, are there people who are not happy with this? More economists than environmentalists, just so you understand. And why would the economists probably feel like they have more to lose? There's more of them.
More of them and they're not in control.
There's more of the economists than there are the environmentalists, just plain out. So, can we do this though? What do you think? Can we have, this is called a positive sum game in game theory. Very simple game theory, very simple mathematics, very, very simple mathematics, arithmetic at this point. Can we have a positive sum game? Give an example of something that is a positive sum game, where we grow as an economy and people have jobs and livelihood, and we also enhance the environment and protect our ecosystems.
Collect the eggs the first 2 days.
There you go. Collect the eggs the first 2 days, sell them on the open market for those morons at the bars who still think that an egg's going to give them a hard on, right? And what else?
Oh, and people make money.
That people make money, and the total population grows. Is that a positive sum game? Does everybody win?
Yes.
That's sustainable development. Give me other examples we may have. Yes, sir.
We could make it a point to base our property value based on the nutritional quality of the soil. To give people incentive to improve the soil because it improves.
There
the
you go.
quality of the
Yeah.
across the
Why can't the value of the property be more than just the actual acreage of the land and the frame of the building, and instead be actually what are the elements found in the land? If you were to add the value of the elements in the land to the property value itself, would a homeowner take greater care to make sure that stuff wasn't going into the land?
Absolutely.
But what adds value to the property though? I mean, you don't just make it up. Obviously, the property has value because it's marketable.
Knowledge.
For a certain
Knowledge.
group of people.
Knowledge.
And as far as like a system creating, it's great if it creates jobs, but it first has to be marketable for sustainable development to work. I mean, we can build all the wind farms we want, we can build all the solar farms, whatever have you.
But if nobody
people
wants
aren't
it,
buying
it's
it
not very
doesn't matter.
sustainable, is it?
Exactly.
You got it. So it's not just what works for the environment and what works for the economy, it's also what works for the people. That's that third E he was talking about, equity. Notice how that all comes back around? Yeah, there you go. Can't be just what's convenient for business and convenient for the environment, also be what's convenient for the people. Otherwise, people are not going to buy it. They're not, and if they're not going to buy it, then it defeats the sustainable part. And hardcore environmentalists, or what we call deep ecologists, resent this kind of stuff. Why do you think they resent it?
Because it makes environmentalism a business.
In some aspect, it turns parts of environmentalism into a business, which they see it as a zero-sum game, right? And if it's a zero-sum game, then how can environmentalism be a business, correct? You were also saying?
Oh, I was saying because they don't want to give it all, if they see it as a negative, because they're not willing to compromise.
We call that being biocentric. So there are environmentalists who are biocentric. They make the biosphere the center of all their analysis. Whereas sustainable development are anthropocentric. They put man at the center. And so for those who are very committed to environmentalism, they often say if you put man at the center, ultimately the environment will pay the cost. That's their argument against sustainable development. Not that they're wrong or right. You can definitely see where they're right in certain aspects. No doubt about it. But the alternative is what? That we give up our standards of living? We're not going to give up our standards of living. Does that make sense? No one's going to. Anybody who has children will not give up their standard of living. Flat out. So what do you do?
Compromise.
I know
Yeah,
what it
that's
is.
right. So sustainable development is a functioning compromise. It's not pretty, it's not perfect, but it's a great way of looking at things. We got to be careful because sometimes what happens is corporations have jumped on the environmental bandwagon. They call it greenwashing.
Yeah.
And they're greenwashing. They're actually saying, here's my organic tomato, as Neville would say. You know? But is it really organic?
No.
No. Right? They don't even know whatever. Yeah, it's in a plastic container, right? And it's been covered in pesticides, and
Well, it's already-
it was organic. Why was it organic, Neville? Because they did one little thing and they made it organic.
Yeah, there's no real control, and the standards are different. So in some places it's lack of pesticides, sometimes it's limited pesticides, and it all comes down to the integrity of the organizations and the people doing it.
So are you saying that we can't trust the FDA to actually certify it
No.
organic?
Exactly.
You know, they're trying, but
They're
it's
trying.
incredibly hard, right? Because if I'm a, just give you an example, I'm an organic farmer and I get a certain kind of pest, and I can't treat it with normal cultural or other methods, then I run out at 5 o'clock in the morning and spray the heck out of it. You know, so how you just don't know. And then there's been greenwashing and deceptive marketing that is marketing things as organic as that aren't. You know, so for example, organic stuff coming from another country. We don't know what their standards are or their enforcement. We know that ours are weak enough, you know, and then we're a free country, so we then again are anti too much government control. So we're balancing this stuff all the time. One moment we say, well, who's enforcing it? Next moment we're saying we don't need all that government. So
What's the alternative? What, in that case, what criteria do you set for food being organic?
Great question. We don't want to be over cynical because there are companies and
Yeah.
corporations who are
Oh, yeah.
engaging in sustainable
Oh, yeah.
practices.
Right.
So if we become super cynical and say, they're all that way, then corporations say, well then, screw you.
Is it sort of like looking at, is that sort of like not trusting the health department too, to ensure that a restaurant's clean, because we don't know if the managers are going in at night and screwing.
So Michael, here's your answer, education. If you're interested, learn. And what we need to do is be critical but not cynical. That's something that you've heard me say before, right? The key is that it's good that you're critical, and I like that Mike's being critical, right? He's asking the right questions. But also, and Mike's not like this, but we try not to be cynical. And I know Mike's not cynical. I know Mike over for a year now. Just like, well, you're a little cynical, but not much, you know? Not enough to that. So the key, what do we mean by that? Being critical but not cynical. We don't want to say all business people are horrible people. All they want to do is make money and they could care less about anything else. Because they also live in this environment, don't they? So if we're going to say all business people, all miners are evil, all these people are evil, that's not true, is it? Get to know some of these people, especially some of the miners and the mining companies. They live in Lucerne, which means they have just as much as interest to make sure that their environments are safe for their kids as it is for the other kids. So
It's like what you said with knowledge.
So I mean, we got to be careful. Does that make sense? So we're not whitewashing everybody with the same brush. But that doesn't mean we can't be critical. If there is a company and they are greenwashing, what should happen? It should be called out. And there are people who do call them out. There are, absolutely. So this is good. It's a good conversation. Be careful. If we don't have sustainability and we interrupt the ecosystem, we disrupt the adaptive cycle of the ecosystem to regenerate itself. What happens is we have in the alpha, reorganization, renewal, boundaries, tenuous, and limitations are possible. Growth, exploitation of resources are readily available. Conservation, things change slowly, resources are locked up, and then those resources are released. And so we have a constant adaptive cycle here of the ecosystem. And when we interrupt this ecosystem, we don't allow this adaptive cycle to take place. Now, I want to talk about the tragedy of the commons, because that'll help us understand a little bit more about how environmental policy is determined. And I have a couple of really goofy YouTube videos that I want to show you guys that can help us understand further the concept of the tragedy of the commons. So, I'm going to Chalk Talk and see if you guys can hear this.
The tragedy of the commons
you hear that back
is
there?
a dilemma that develops when a group shares a limited resource. Imagine some farmers are sharing a pasture for their cows. The cows eat the grass, but the grass grows back, and so the cows have plenty to eat. So they add more cows, which eat more grass. Eventually, the grass can barely grow fast enough to keep the cows fed. Farmer Alex decides to add another cow anyway. He figures the extra cow doesn't eat that much grass and will only mean a little less for everyone's cows. But he will get all the milk from the extra cow. Don't look at me. If I don't, they will. The other farmers feel the same way. Each knows that they are hurting the pasture they share, but their fear of losing out seems to force their hands. That's the tragedy of the commons. And it doesn't just threaten cartoon pastures. Stocks of Atlantic cod and bluefin tuna are greatly diminished. Aquifers that can replenish if water is withdrawn slowly are now emptying. Even roads can screech to a standstill while drivers wonder why others don't take public transit. By studying the interactions between people and their environments, researchers are becoming better able to figure out ways to protect ranges, forests, oceans, and even highways. This will become more and more important as the population of the Earth grows, but the space available stays the same. More people will be using the commons, and we may be on the brink of tragedy.
Okay, this helps sort of understand what we mean by the tragedy of the commons. It becomes a tragedy when the one person says, well, if I don't take advantage, someone else will. And I don't want to be taken advantage of and lose, right? So I'm going to do it. And what happens if everybody has that mentality? We all lose. That's why it's called the tragedy of the commons. So look at this part 2, and then I think that we're good and we can take a break, right?
Yeah. I'll just throw in our most glaring example in this country would be the Dust Bowl. Exactly this example. The commons was the public lands, which are controlled by the exact same people we're dealing with today, Bureau of Land. In those days, it was just the government, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service. We actually got the exact same. I just thought about it. We've got the exact same thing coming along with these renewable energy farms. Why not come? If we put one, why can't we put another one? It's not destroying the commons.
And if I don't do it, another company will.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. The desert is a commons. We all use it.
Yeah.
We live in it and we use it.
And it's 80% public land, so it's very much a common. And they're multiple use. They have to allow all uses.
So you don't want to let a tragedy develop in the commons out here in the desert. The desert's a very special ecosphere, very unique, that you shouldn't take for granted. People out there say, oh, the desert's ugly. Quite the contrary. I find the desert very beautiful. In fact, I've always told Neville my goal is to retire in the desert. Though I'm more of a fan of like the low desert. I'm going to go to Palm Springs. Then what is it? The neon lights in the desert out there. All right.
Lots of wind generators.
Let's take a look then at part 2.
The tragedy of the commons says that self-interest and competition can cause people to ruin a shared resource. In this case, farmers who shared a pasture overgrazed the cows for a little more milk for themselves and ended up destroying the pasture for everyone. Is there anything that could have been done? If people ruin what they share, sometimes the best avenue is to have them not share. Each farmer's self-interest will ensure that they protect their own property. But not everyone is okay with making public land private property. And some things like the oceans and the sky can't be made private anyway. Luckily, people can cooperate to protect the commons, especially if they feel like it's a shared sacrifice. Freeloaders, though, can make everyone else feel like suckers. And sometimes it only takes a few cheaters to ruin the commons for everyone. In those cases, rules are required. Research supported by the National Science Foundation has shown that privatization, cooperation, and regulation can all work to protect commons, but only if proper enforcement exists. Resources common to multiple groups can be the hardest to protect, and that's a challenging task for everyone.
So what were the 3 things that they said could help avoid a tragedy of the commons? Privatization, what else? Let's go back.
Regulation.
Everyone. In those cases, rules are required. Research supported by the National Science Foundation has shown that privatization, cooperation, and regulation can all work to protect commons, but only if proper enforcement exists.
Okay. Privatization, cooperation, and regulation. Those 3 things, what are they? What is privatization?
Ownership.
sometimes what happens is, in order to protect the commons, it might be best just to give it, privatize it. For example, we limit access by charging a fee. And then what happens is not everybody can use it. Is that now a commons? No, but it avoids a tragedy. Can we have an example like this? So many examples of this, where we limit who can go in because we don't want a tragedy of the commons.
The forestry pass to go and cut firewood.
Absolutely. You need a forestry pass to cut firewood. What about camping?
Same pass.
Fishing license. Why? If we privatize it, what we do is we limit its use by charging a fee. Now it's not available to everyone, is it?
Yeah, but it also pays for the ordinance.
Do we prevent the commons from being destroyed? Yeah.
You try to.
Yeah, we try to. And it does work. For example, I think they don't allow in Yosemite so many people, right? Every year they limit the number of people. The Grand Canyon's like that now. Do you know they limit who can go into the Grand Canyon? Why limit it? And it doesn't get destroyed. Yeah, that's right. What was the other one? Cooperation. What does cooperation look like? Give me examples. Working together in what? Give me an example of cooperation to try and avoid a tragedy of the commons.
Not leaving your trash?
What's that?
Not leaving your trash behind?
Okay. Everybody working together in a neighborhood to make sure the neighborhood is clean. Everybody working. What's that? Homeowners Association.
Yeah, that's what I was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Cooperation, working together to make sure that we are all right doing the right thing. And then last thing was regulation. If all else fails, if privatization doesn't work, cooperation doesn't work, then what's left? Government regulation. And government regulation is pretty darn effective. Why is it pretty darn effective? Because it's enforced. Right? A little police car at the end. Because it's enforced. Who is it enforced by? Government. Government. All right. So questions. Just a very quick introduction. What did we learn today? We learned about the 4 laws of ecology, right? We learned about ecology itself. We learned about the biosphere. We learned about steady state. We learned about the commons. We learned about the tragedy of the commons. We learned about a zero-sum versus a positive-sum game. We also learned about what we can do to try to avoid this tragedy of the commons. Did we learn a lot?
Yes.
Yeah, I say that we definitely learned a lot. So let's go eat.
Okay, bye.
Time for dinner. Neville, what time are we coming back?
Yeah, so it's kind of your guys' call. This movie, this video is really unique. A couple of years ago, not even a year ago, we had the people who developed this movie. It's called Green Fire, and it's about basically the change in Aldo Leopold. Aldo Leopold is considered one of the pioneers of conservation thinking, and especially of restoration, which our next workshop next week is when we use it, we are going to degrade the resource. How do we restore it? And so it's a really excellent movie. I think the one I've got is the shortened one, about 50 minutes. I think I don't know if it's on there or not. But so if we started back at 7:15, would that give you 35 minutes, enough time to go get something to eat? Is that enough?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then we should be, like I said, done at about 8:15, 8:30. Be cool to have some discussion afterwards. So, okay.